If you follow any Boston Herald journalist on Twitter, you might have noticed something strange earlier this week. Blacked out profile pics and in some cases locked accounts that couldn't be viewed. Turns out they were protesting the suspension of a colleague for violating a social media policy. Adam Riley has more.
After former New England Patriot Aaron Hernandez's suicide, Boston Herald reporter Chris Villani tweeted out new details. The notes found in Aaron Hernandez's cell were letters to daughter and fiancé saying he loved them and would see them in heaven, per source. His reward for that scoop? A 3-day unpaid suspension for violating a Herald policy which says journalists need editorial approval before they tweet breaking news.
This is a policy that so far it hasn't been a problem because it hasn't been enforced. 4.5 years.
Not a single case?
Never.
Orion Johnson is a Herald reporter and union rep. He's not sure why that particular tweet pushed management to act, but now he's bracing for more enforcement of a policy he calls unworkable.
You look at what Herald folks do and what media folks do every day. They post news to their Twitter profiles to get a boss's approval before you do that every single time is cumbersome.
A number of Villani's colleagues agreed, protesting his suspension by blacking out their Twitter photos and in some cases locking their accounts. But publisher Pat Purcell was unmoved. In a statement, he said the policy was established through a thoughtful process and has his full support. Johnson is hoping he'll change his mind.
We have a lot of respect for Pat, for everything that he's done to keep the paper running, and not running, but thriving. We're really hoping that he can take a look at what his employees feel.
I have to say, I'm a little sympathetic with the publisher and the editors there. This is not a new policy. It's been in place for at least 4 years, since 2013, I think. It's very similar to social media policies at other major newspapers across the country. This particular story, I think, probably bubbled to the surface, and I don't know for sure, because it was a juicy story, and he was quoting a source, an anonymous source, essentially. Yeah. So, and it was in direct violation of the policy. So, I mean, while I understand what Orion Johnson is saying, it is a cumbersome process. But, you know, if you're breaking news, and by the way, he broke that news. Mm-hmm. I think no one else had it before. And as I understand it, he didn't make a quick phone call to the Herald saying, I've got something either. So they found it, I believe, you know, in a Twitter feed themselves. So I think it was a combination of things.
This is a difficult one because, I mean, a rule is a rule. If they have that policy, then you have to abide by the policy. On the flip side, there's a lot of pressure, and I've talked about this before, from management to break news and to get it out as quickly as possible. One of the only things that kept showing up on my annual review when I was working at CNN from this one manager. I've never talked about this publicly, actually. Yeah. But they said...
You don't tweet it out.
That's right. I didn't tweet it out. Yeah, I'm not breaking stuff, active on social media, getting the stuff out there.
There's a reason.
Right.
Exactly. That was
a reason, right. And so there is that constant pressure to break news. And, you know, when you do break news, you get it out there on social media, then other people usually retweet it. It gets publicity for the publication, for the network. And so management likes it. But at the same time, they also seem to want to cover themselves by having these policies.
Well, they're ultimately responsible for the content.
And I understand that. But they're encouraging you to do more, but at the same time, they aren't rewarding you and they're punishing you if you do put something out there. And in this case, it wasn't wrong.
Right. I agree with Dan. I think there are competing pressures here. I think the journalists are under a lot of pressure to be first to the story. And Twitter is a great mechanism for doing that. On the other hand, as a former employment lawyer, the policy is the policy, and you can't violate it and expect that there aren't going to be consequences, even if there haven't been before.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the idea that you need to run a breaking news tweet by a top editor actually is unusual. I don't think there are too many news organizations that do that. There's usually a certain level of leeway and guidance as you move along. But on the other hand, I have to agree with Dan and Jennifer. The policy is the policy, and I think that if people inside the Herald weren't aware of that policy, I think they are now.
I'm going to quote Joshua Benton, who's often at this table, who says, then put in a situation that's very easy to get to whomever you need to. Obviously, this is a reporter who said, got it, I don't want anybody else to go to this source, let me get it out there. In this case, as everybody has mentioned, it was true. The problem for the management people and the employment lawyer on the end is if it wasn't, then you're in a pickle. And so I understand that. But the way it's set up now is it would be cumbersome to try to get to somebody.
Would. But what kind of a policy could you do it?
Well, you figure out something. You figure somebody who's on call. Maybe
you have
do like a doctor's thing.
Chip in your brain.
No, you just have somebody that you can get to instantly. Yeah. I don't think that's a wrong way to go.
Well, maybe they do have that. I don't
think so, because that's what the reporters were saying. Then hey, you're strapping us to the point that there are competing pressures. You want us to do this, but yet there's not a way to do this very quickly.
And is a single source issue part of that as well? Their policy?
Probably.
That if he had put two sources in there, would that have helped?
No, I have the policy here. It doesn't mention that. It just says breaking
news. But I
news.
will say that Joe Shaka, the editor, put out a statement in which he talked about, we want this stuff to be verified.
Right. We don't want to be a part of fake news, he said. This is how that gets started. So he's right about that.
We'll see what that on both sides.
Okay.